Welcome to the Hermetic Astrology Podcast. I'm Gary Caton in Waynesville, North Carolina. You can find me on the web at dreamastrologer.com. And today is Wednesday, Mercury's day. It's Mercury's hour. It's just past 2 in the afternoon here. Mercury is culminating at the midheaven in the early degrees of Aquarius. And in about a week or so, Mercury will reach greatest elongation. In about a week or so, Mercury is going to cross the ecliptic plane. Mercury's already getting pretty close to maximum elongation. And this is the date that I use to kick off the beginning of the retrograde process. There's what I'm going to show you today is 4 different views of how to frame Mercury's journey through these signs, these 3 signs, the air signs, that Mercury will be doing these curious loop-shaped patterns throughout the year. Last year, Mercury did the retrogrades in air signs, and again this year. And that pattern moves then into the water element, and then fire, and then let's see, it goes fire, water, air, earth. So actually we're going to go into earth, and then fire, and then water. But the pattern repeats over 6 to 7 years. Okay, and so that's something that is going to be consistent from last year to this year, that it's happening in the air signs, although the stations direct are going to be happening in the earth signs. Most of the retrograde is going to be contained, the inferior conjunction is going to be contained in the air sign of Aquarius. And so most of the retrograde happens in the air signs, and therefore Mercury's in air signs more than any other signs this year. But what I want to share with you today is a little bit more about how we can understand this process astronomically, and then what kind of ideas we can glean from the astronomy to make sense of the meaning and purpose of this passage. What does it mean? How can we use the fact that Mercury is spending all this time in the air signs in our lives? And so I want to share several different views of how we might go about that. I first started presenting this material back in 2017. I presented it at the NCGR National Conference in let's see, that was Baltimore once again. Yeah, they did one in Baltimore in 2007 too. And there's a lot of stuff here that is visual. So for those listeners that are just tuning in with the audio, I'm going to try to do my best to keep this where you can follow along, but you might want to think about tuning into the YouTube at some point to get the visuals. So my first slide here, I have Morpheus from the Matrix movie. It's a little meme, and it says you've got Morpheus with the dark glasses, and Neo's reflected in his glasses, and he's saying, what if I told you all those pictures you've been shown of retrograde motion are a lie? And this is a takeoff on, a lot of people think that the Matrix is a Gnostic statement, in that God in the Matrix is God in Gnosticism, or at least the God that the Judeo-Christian God is seen to be like a faker or a poser, like it's not really the ultimate God, it's sort of an in-between. And they kind of have this whole trip, and you can see some of that in the Matrix, like that you're being fed a pack of lies that reality is not what you think it is, and so on and so forth. Now, I'm not going that far. This is a little bit of an exaggeration. The pictures that you've been shown of retrograde motion are not lies so much as they are half or even quarter truths, because I'm about to show you 4 different ways of seeing it. So if only one of those has been presented to you as if it was the truth, well, then it's about a quarter truth, isn't it? You see? So anyway, what I do think is, seriously, is a good metaphor here is that there's a sort of a hierarchy of experience here that we're being shown in the Matrix. Remember, Neo is just this hacker dude, you know, little more savvy, maybe next level than the people who come and buy his, you know, discs and whatnot. But, you know, he's certainly not initiated. He's still, you know, working for the man. And, you know, he's got some knowledge, but he's not really been initiated into the deep mysteries. And he's certainly not living the truth of the kind of hacker persona that he's been, you know, it's sort of like his side hustle, if you will. And there's a lot of people in the astrology community now, if there is such a thing in the astrology world, let's just say the astrology universe, who remind me kind of like Neo. And I mean this with all due respect. They are, you know, a few steps ahead of, you know, what we might call the muggles. But they confuse that with being like Morpheus, which Morpheus is probably several levels ahead at this point, right? I mean, as we find out early on, you know, when Morpheus does finally begin to initiate Neo, he says, you know, hey, come on and hit me, you know, stop thinking about hitting me, stop trying to hit me and hit me. You know, and Neo is unable to do so. And so there's that right there. And the leap across the abyss, that's very Kabbalistic. There's an abyss in the between the supernal, the first 3 Sephirot, and the lower tiers of the Kabbalah, the tree of life. There's an abyss that one has to cross, and that's reflective of that. So there's a lot of esoteric stuff in that movie, but I think this idea that you can just, you know, read some blogs and that, you know, remember Neo goes, ooh, you know, oh, I know judo, you know, and it's like, maybe you know it here, but you don't know it here or here, you know, yet. You see? So there's this interesting kind of hierarchy that is represented here that I think is applicable. You know, I did some work for a major website a couple years back, and you know, I looked at, you know, the team that I was joining, and I looked at some people's bios, and I'm going, wow, you know, there's people on here. Their bio says they've been doing astrology 3 years, and they're writing for a major website. I'm like, wow, like I would not have even imagined that was possible back. I mean, it was a full 10 years before I was published in the Mountain Astrologer, between when I started studying, and I was initiated through a dream, you know. So anyway, it's something to think about, that there's, you know, that just because you've read some blogs, or, you know, you've studied some apps, or, you know, back in the day for me, I learned it through books, but that's another story. That you know, doesn't mean there's not more levels for you. And even for me, you know, listen, I've been doing this a full Saturn cycle now, and I'm still being initiated into deeper and deeper levels of the mysteries. But I would say I'm a little bit more akin to Morpheus than I am Neo at this point. And I think that's a fair assessment. At any rate, when Morpheus says that he's going to set Neo free, he's going to release him from the prisons of the mental traps that he's been stuck in. This is very esoteric in that it's actually, to me, it's a replay of Plato's cave. You know, Plato said that we see reality, we see what we think is reality, and it's only shadows on the wall of a cave, and that the light of true reality is shining and casting shadows on the cave, and we see the shadows and we think that's reality. You know, and it's very much, I think it's very much similar to what the statement that the Matrix is trying to make, that there's this reality that we think is real, but it's not. It's a shadow of reality. And it's interesting because, you know, there's this whole idea of, you know, the shadow of the retrograde that I don't like very much, because I don't think it's a very accurate term. But it is interesting in the sense of, like, you know, when you begin to understand the various points of view, that, you know, I like to say oftentimes that, like, you know, if you're a professional photographer, you have a whole bag of lenses. You don't walk around with one lens shooting everything with that same lens. No professional photographer does that. That would be ludicrous. And so, you know, as astrologers, we need to be able to change our lenses, to change our point of view, depending on what the kind of shot that we're trying to achieve, you see. And so, you know, you can adopt different points of view based on what effect you're trying to come up with, you see. And so if we look at, you know, right now the visual is a cylinder. And if you look at a cylinder from the side, it looks like a circle. If you look at it from, you know, the other side, it looks like a square. And, you know, we could sit here, and if people were sitting over here, you know, they'd be going, no, 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 it's a circle. They're looking at the shadow of the thing. And the other ones are going, no, 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 it's a square. How could you think it's a circle? It reminds me of a lot of the arguments that people get into, you know, blue and red, and, you know, to do this, to not do that, you know, you know, it's all depends on your point of view. The reality that you see is a product of your point of view, you see. If you change your point of view, your reality will change. And so, you know, this I think is not appreciated enough in astrology, that there are many points of view that many schools of thought of astrology, for instance, you know, and I don't do this thing where, you know, one's better than the other. I think there's a lot of really cool tools from the modern era. There's a lot of really tools from what I call from the classic era. And the traditional era for me is astrology with your face. It's visual sky-based astrology. That's tradition for me. There's a lot of cool stuff from that. And I pull from all of them. You know, I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, I'm a traditional astrologer, because I don't think there's any such thing. Number one, you know, we're all modern people. But anyway, there's a kind of, you know, there's a kind of de facto benefic malefic sort of binary with respect to retrogrades that was certainly very prevalent even up until a few years ago. I do think it's starting to change. Largely because of people, you know, questioning the validity of this whole shadow thing, people like me, and people, you know, starting to become more fluent in what the reality of planetary motion actually is, you know. But yeah, you know, for a long time you'd see people regurgitating this same hacked stuff, and it's very much like, you know, don't do this, don't do that, don't do the other if Mercury's retrograde or in its shadow. And what most people don't realize is when you add that up, that's 50% of your life that you're throwing out the window, that you're not going to do this, that, or the other. Now, that's crazy. I'm not going to live like that. And no way, you know. And so I started searching. I said, there's got to be a better way, you know, and there's at least 3 better ways that I'm going to show you. But we're kind of going to go through a tour de force of the various views of retrograde, starting with the earliest and coming up to now. And so it's important to understand that the 360-day year comes from both the Babylonian, let's just say Mesopotamian, because Babylon was only one of the cultures that existed in that area. The Mesopotamian and the Egyptian, and then the Greeks seized upon this idealized year, if you will, and created the tropical zodiac through the use of the elements and the modes, cardinal, fixed, and mutable, combined with, there's 3, cardinal, fixed, and mutable, combined with 4 elements equals 12 signs, right? Now, it's important to understand that the zodiac is an idealized year, right? This is not an accurate depiction of the sky. The zodiac is not the sky at all. It's a seasonal calendar, is what it is. It's an agricultural calendar. So it's an idealized version of celestial motion. And it's idealized from point of view of the North Pole of the ecliptic. The North Pole of the ecliptic is essentially, if we are standing on the Earth, and the Earth is what produces the ecliptic, the Earth's path around the sun, and we look straight up, essentially, the North Pole of the ecliptic is in Draco, actually, the constellation Draco, which is interesting in and of itself. But if we're looking from way up, essentially a God's eye view of things, if you will, we're looking down. That is how the zodiac is produced. And because it's from way up here, whatever nuances there are in planetary motion that are vertical in nature, we can't see it. It's all flattened out. We only see east-west movement in this. We don't see north-south movement. It's all flattened out. And so what happens is commonly you see depictions of retrograde motion with what I call a squished S. They say the planet goes like this, and then it goes back, and then it goes forward again. Well, I'm here to tell you no planet ever does that. That's bullshit. It doesn't exist. It's an idealized representation of it, which is maybe useful. It certainly, it's enough to let us know that the planet's going back and forth, and it shows us the degrees within which it does that. So it's a very basic tool, but it's not indicative of reality at all. This thing here is often what you see. There's this squished S where, Mercury, turns retrograde in the 10th degree of Aquarius and then goes backwards until it reaches the 24th degree of Capricorn, and then it goes forward again, right? Well, okay, that's a bit of information that's useful, but this is not an accurate depiction of the motion of Mercury at all, not even close. And so anybody who's saying that it is actually either fooling themselves or they're not being fully truthful. At any rate, from this limited viewpoint, 1 of 4 that we're going to cover today, basically the classical view of retrograde was that it was that planets that were retrograde were unfit to be rulers. For instance, if you wanted to pick, the captain of the ship, to use the Hellenistic metaphor, or various things, being retrograde would kind of, no, you're not actually eligible for the crew member position, because we don't want a retrograde planet steering the ship. That's not going to work out well, was the idea. And so, now this is my interpretation. Basically, what I'm saying is, since the lights, the sun and moon, are always direct, they never go retrograde. And the planets are direct most of the time, vast majority of the time. Direct motion, therefore, refers to, quote, heavy air quotes, normal. I use heavy air quotes because who's normal, right? So, that's, is it right now, the DSM-5, I think we're on number, says that if you're still grieving after 1 calendar year, you have an illness. It's like, really? So at day 364, I'm healthy. At day 366, I'm unhealthy. Wow. Yeah. Okay. What, come on, man. Like that kind of thing that's how, but we have to define normal somehow. So there you go. But essentially a direct planet is more or less operating according to and within the bounds of the currently established socio-cultural norms, for better or worse. To be normal with an unhealthy normal is not exactly a good thing, but you know, you would qualify for captain of the ship because you know you're going along with the program essentially. Now, since retrograde motion is more rare and it goes against the flow of normal motion, then retrograde motion signifies a deviation from and or a challenge to one or more sociocultural norms. So this is why retrograde planets are unfit, because they basically do things differently. They do things their own way, and that could be great, might not be so great. It's not something that we really quite trust or want to put all our eggs in that basket. And so that's where the classical view of retrograde comes from. I'll share a little story here, and I mean this with every ounce of due respect, because I think that Robert Zoller was a very brilliant man. I mean, I know that he was. I remember sitting there listening to him speak with my mouth agape at how brilliant he was. I mean, and so I have tremendous respect for him. But I remember, you know, hearing him speak about retrogrades and thinking, wow, even he drank the Kool-Aid a little bit. You know, this is my opinion, my personal opinion. But I remember thinking I was a little disappointed. I was like, really? And I asked him, he said something about, you know, oh, this and that, this planet would mean this and this and this. And it sounded great. And he said, but it will deliver less than expected because it's retrograde. And I was like, wow. I was like, so, and I said, so would that be different if it were near its station, if it were about to turn direct? And he says to me, Gary, it would be different if it were direct. And I was like, okay. And I just thought, you know, wow, like this is unsatisfactory to me. I don't want to live in a universe where, you know, things are good if they're direct and not so great if they're retrograde. Like there's got to be a little more nuance there. So, but to continue, it's important to remember that normal, again, normal is not necessarily always healthy, right? And so a departure from normal depends on the health of the norm, whether a departure from normal is good or bad, right? So for instance, if consuming all the junk food and sugary snacks we're constantly bombarded with, you know, I still watch football mostly so I have something to talk about with my old man because he's a diehard sports fan. And so I keep up with a few teams just so, you know, what about, you know, if conversation veers off into uncomfortable territory, it's like, so what about the Packers or whatever? And, but anyway, you know, it's so difficult for me to watch this stuff because it's just like all of this crap that they're trying to sell you. And it's like, man, you know, so you try to mute it or, you know, get up and do a couple sets of push-ups or whatever. But yeah, if that's normal, if normal is actually, you know, consuming all the crap that they're constantly pushing at us, well, then, you know, departing from normal may be a way more healthy and way more the person that I would want captaining my ship than being normal. You see what I'm saying? So essentially what I'm saying is the poison is in the dose, because also if you think about it, like from a perspective of Jungian psychology, that even healthy patterns, if they are overdone, even like let's say, for instance, you know, if I am, for instance, very much a rational thinking, you know, Jung had 4 functions, you know, thinking, feeling, intuition, and sensation, right? So let's say that I'm a thinker and I'm constantly thinking, even that can get overdone. I mean, it's famously a lot of people that were famous thinkers, they would, you know, like Einstein, he would go for walks and then his ideas would become clear to him. Uh, Edison would lay down on the couch and have a nap. It's like if you do one thing too much, even look, you can drink so much water that you kill yourself. It dilutes all the electrolytes in your body. So even water, one of the basic things we need for life, too much of it can be a bad thing. So the idea is that the dominant function in Jungian psychology is a trap. The more you grow into the dominant function, the less room there is for growth. You have to discover your inferior function because there's infinite room for growth there, right? So if retrogrades represent a departure from normal, in this case, the personal normal, my, same old, again, might be uncomfortable, but ultimately it's a enormous opportunity for growth. And even if I still suck at it, relatively speaking, I'm more whole for having explored that inferior function than I was before, when I was just focused on what I'm really good at, you see? So again, the poison is in the dose. The departure from normal, not necessarily a bad thing. It can be good if the norm is unhealthy, and it can be good if we've overdone a healthy norm. Okay, so that's sort of what I would call classical view of retrograde motion. So then in let's see, I guess it was the 90s. Let's see, I want to say it was the 90s that Erin Sullivan came out with her classic book, Retrograde Planets. First published in copyright 1992. Yeah. So Retrograde Planets, Erin Sullivan. I mean, really, truly classic work, of course, inspired my book. And so I hold it in the highest esteem. But she essentially included, and Robert Hand talked about this as well when he wrote about retrograde motion. He said, we really should think about the heliocentric point of view here to get a broader picture of things. So if we look at the idea of Mercury retrograde from point of view of the heliocentric, what I see with the heliocentric is that Mercury is one of 3 planets, including Venus and Mars, that are capable of penetrating the Sun-Earth enclave. This is what astronomers call the astronomical unit, the distance between the Sun and Earth. In other words, Mercury gets closer to Earth than the Sun is from Earth during the retrograde. So does Venus and so does Mars. So Mercury moves from what is known as the superior, from Latin superius, meaning above, part of its orbit, into the inferior part, below, right? Above, below. That's a very hermetic situation going on there. So Mercury moves from being on the other side of the Sun from the Earth during direct motion, and then moves going between the Sun and the Earth, penetrating that inner space, that inner heart space of the system during the retrograde. So one of the things that Robert Hand said is that, hey, if now he didn't use this word, this is my word, actually this is Adam Gainsbourg's word, Earth proximity is what Adam calls it. But he said, since closeness is part of the retrograde experience, maybe the problem with retrogrades is that we're too close to something, and he meant psychologically too close. For instance, if I am emotionally involved in a particular team winning, it's going to be hard for me to see see objectively that they're where they're not doing the right things, because I just want to be supportive. I just want to cheer the team. Oh yeah, they're great. Let's go team. And I'm not going to necessarily be able to see like, oh wow, they're really not that great because they keep doing the stupid stuff. And then eventually, like, even the best fans eventually get there, right? But you see what I'm saying? Like, if we're too close, if we're too invested in a particular outcome, it's hard to see anything else because we see what we want or we need to see. I think it's a Jewish saying that we see the world as it is, or as we are, not as it is, right? or we see things as we are, not as they are, you know, and that's very true. And so there's this over subjectivity that's involved in the retrograde. And so it's basically that's what we call myopia when we're too, you know, when our focus is too narrow, we can't see the forest for the trees, essentially. On the other hand, I think the opposite is also true. Hyperopia, in other words, we may be unable to see through, you know, something that, in other words, if the macrocosm is the above and the microcosm is the below, right? So there's this, and Mercury's in the below, it's in the microcosm, and we're stuck in the microcosm state. We may not have a clear view of the macrocosm state. There might be some, you know, collective understanding of normal that is not healthy, but we're unable to see that it's not healthy because we're stuck in a subjective space. And so having a more what's in this for me attitude might actually be more healthy, because it would help us attend to a proper self-care, where we would do things that are right for us and not what people tell us. Because you know what, it turns out that so-called norm, I mean, how many times have we heard these kind of things where, you know, oh, you're supposed to eat this or that or the other, or you're not supposed to eat this or that or the other, and turns out, you know, decades later, oh, you know what, those things really aren't bad for you. So you know, like, you see what I'm saying? So this idea of closeness can go either way, right? We can be too close to something and not able to see it because of our proximity, but we can also be because we're so close to this, we're too far away from the other to see it clearly either, you see? So since Mercury is further from the sun, Mercury direct would tend to be more objective and be able to see the big picture, which means the prevailing cultural norms of the collective, right? But since Mercury is closer to the Earth than the sun during retrograde motion, there's a more subjectivity. Truth is defined more internally than externally, in other words. And so it forces us to see things more personally. And this can be a bad thing if we're, you know, if our personal reality is out of step in a way that's not conducive, but it can also be a good thing in the sense that if our personal reality is actually more healthy or more appropriate for our personal reality than it is for than whatever the collective is pushing at the time, you see? So that's like what I would say the early modern, you know, point of view. And then from there, we're gonna look at 2 points of view, which are, I guess you would say they're postmodern, although I don't claim to be a postmodernist. So, you know, please don't confuse me saying that with any embrace of any kind of postmodern philosophy, if there is such a thing. But it's you know, I in my attempts to understand this, I've gone a couple other places, and there's a few other people that are beginning to be able to adopt these points of view, and it's very interesting to see what they come up with in their own way when they do this. But this next view, you know, this view was, you know, people like Daniel Gemario in the shamanic astrology paradigm, you know, he was doing this in the 90s. So this is still early modern. It's about the same time that Erin was writing her book. But, you know, the horoscope wheel, as I said, this top-down view from point of view of the ecliptic North Pole, that wasn't always the normal. Normal before that for the Mesopotamians was the sky, and the Egyptians as well. It was the sky. These cats went out and observed the sky every day, you know, and so the horizon rather than the ecliptic was the main plane of reference, you see. And when we look at, you know, things in terms of the sky, what we see is that recently Mercury has just entered the evening sky as Venus is exiting the evening sky. So, and then what we see is that Mercury does this loop where it gets higher and higher until it reaches what's called maximum elongation, and then it begins to move back towards the sun. And it actually begins to move back towards the sun before it turns retrograde. It moves back towards the sun because it's slowing. When Mercury is going faster than the sun, Mercury's distance from the sun will be increasing each day. So in the sky view, Mercury will seem higher in the sky each evening. When Mercury's distance becomes the same as the sun, it'll appear to hover, and it'll sort of, it does this little U-shaped turn, actually, is what it does. And that's because of another deal. That's because it's shifting in latitude, but we'll talk about that later. But so Mercury at elongation is the same speed as the sun, a degree a day, that is. And then as Mercury loses speed, the sun is still going at a degree a day. So the sun's getting closer. So Mercury will appear to be lower in the sky, even though it hasn't actually stopped yet. It's still going, 3/4 of a degree a day. It's not stationary yet, but it appears lower in the sky. It appears to turn essentially retrograde in terms of sky motion way before. And so, oh, here's the so-called shadow of the retrograde effect, I guess. But, again, shadow, what shadow? Mercury's still perfectly visible. It's just less high in the sky than it was the day before, and then again the day after. So I don't think I would use shadow in any sense of the word. Shadow would really refer to where Venus is, which is, becoming invisible. She's literally entering into the underworld. And that was really how the ancients understood this. They thought that, for instance, every night when the sun set, that the sun god would get on a ship, on a barge, and go through the underworld and then rise again in the morning, And so there was this underworld journey that planets that were exiting the visible space of the sky were seen to take. And so if there's any shadow, it would be there, you see, the literal journey through the underworld, the dark passage. So from this point of view, Mercury's retrograde motion is more of a disappearing act. It's a changing of worlds. It's a changing of worlds from the world we can see to the world we only know of in myth, really. It's this invisible world that we have a lot of rich myths about, but we don't really know. And so, there's a lot of ritual that goes along with that in hopes that, oh, please return and please come back to normal, and so forth. But what I discovered when I was looking at it from this point of view is that the elongations, the evening elongation, when Mercury is at the maximum distance from the sun and therefore its maximum height in the sky, the interior conjunction or inferior conjunction when Mercury is between the sun and the earth, and the maximum elongation as morning star, these three events all happen near the same degrees of the zodiac every single time. And this is in, when you read the Emerald Tablet, it says that which is below corresponds to that which is above, and that which is above corresponds to that which is below. And one day I had come back in and I had learned that, Mercury, in the month where Mercury is invisible, where it's conjunct the sun, there's really no point in going out because you ain't going to see them. And so it's really like every other month that you get these elongations and you get this chance to photograph. And I was out there doing my photography. And I realized, and I was just, and I was kind of documenting what I saw, and I was looking ahead and I was going, wow, I don't think I'm going to get out again. And so I was looking ahead to the next time, and I was thinking, wow. And I had the Emerald Tablet sitting there on my desk, and I was like, wow, above, below, like this all, like, could they have been talking about the actual astronomy here? And I was like, nah, like that couldn't be that simple, man. Like this is, and I was like, maybe you should check. And so I started looking it up and I was like, holy crap, I cannot believe this. Like these elongations every single time. And the first time I was like, no way, man, it actually does add up above, below, and above. They're the same. And I was like, okay, but that's just one time, right? Like it's not. Then again and again, I was like, every single time, what a remarkable thing. And as far as I know, nobody has ever written about that before. So it was rather remarkable to me, and that became the basis for me wanting to write my book, Hermetica Triptycha Volume 1. Is that I wanted to use this new pattern that I saw to reframe the experience. But essentially what I'm saying is that if visibility is like, we can, being able to do astrology with our face, we can see the planet in the sky, right? So that it's visible in, as we are out, battling the elements and the wind and the rain and whatever, and right, then Mercury being visible in a material sense refers to material agency. That is the ability to conduct, from a classical sense, the ability to conduct business, to be operative, practical, and instrumental in the material world. So essentially, I'm agreeing with the classical people. The difference is that invisibility from the sky point of view represents a journey through another world. So it's not that they're unfit. Well, maybe I'm still agreeing with them that perhaps, anyways, they're unfit in terms of material agency. But perhaps they have another kind of agency, that is spiritual agency, or what we might call non-ordinary realities. Intuition, body awareness, dreaming, journeying, whatever, whatever invisible realms. Maybe these retrograde planets or the invisible planets have a lot more agency in terms of unseen or spiritual realms. So it's not that they're unfit, it's that they're differently fit. They're fit to do things that are not materially focused, you see? So that's a very different way of seeing it, actually, which is actually I think, more truly esoteric, because, esoterically speaking, the spiritual world really is the source of the material world. And so to have agency, spiritual agency, would typically be deemed, higher or better than material agency necessarily. So if the retrograde experience is a disappearing act, there's something that's passing away from visibility. Is it dying or is it rebirthing? You see, because if we understand that this process is from passing away from a material space and into a spiritual space, and then returning to a spiritual place, for instance, in the famous allegory of alchemy, where it says, vitriol, visita interiora, visit the interior spaces of the earth, and through rectification you will find the hidden stone. So notice they're saying visit the interior places. They're not saying that you should try to go there and stay there. You can't stay there. That nobody can do that. But this journey of going to the interior spaces and returning is what this is about. And if we can embrace that journey, if we can embrace the fact that, oh, okay, Mercury has reached elongation, and so now it's beginning to go, and we say, oh, now it's time to let go of material things, and we can, so we can practice, we can practice, potlatch or giveaway, fasting, purging ourselves of difficult emotions through, confessional or journaling or these kind of things, right? If we can practice the negretto of the alchemy, essentially, then we're naturally clearing space, and the actual retrograde experience, by the time that happens, we might have cleared space for a wonderful spiritual experience, because we were actually in step with the process of passing away from the material focus, you see. And we might get these wonderful spiritual experience or downloads or whatever, whichever way you want to go. And so that's where I went with this when I said, basically the period between maximum elongation and inferior conjunction is the nigredo. That's like, okay, separating from normal, letting things go, allowing things to pass away, figuring out what things I'm too attached to and maybe need to release attachments to, figuring out what things, that I've over focused on, and choosing to change my focus to something inferior, right? Remember, inferior function, Jungian, was that thing that we do that we don't really like, that we're not good at. Mercury's in the inferior, going towards the inferior conjunction. It makes sense, you see? And then the period around the conjunction would then represent the albedo, which is this white light that happens in the middle of the darkness. There's this white light that the soul, and it represents new possibilities. Well, you're only going to see the light of new possibilities if you've let go of the old shit first, you see? So this idea of shadow, okay, even if we do embrace shadow, there's at least 3 different colors of that shadow. There's the black shadow, but then there's the white, the albedo. And then when we get this illumination, we have to then go back out into the world and make that real. Whatever insight we had, it's meaningless if we don't do something with it in the world and go back out and change our world, change our reality based on this insight that we received in the heart of the darkness, you see. And so the libido is that. So the morning elongation would represent that, about taking this out and doing the hard work of making it real. The blood, investing the blood, sweat, and tears and making something real, you see. And so this period, and by the way, the dates, the elongation is January 7th, evening elongation. The inferior conjunction is January 23rd, and the morning elongation is February 16th. Those dates are, obviously, I think a day on either side of those would be great for ceremony, in terms of ceremony. And, experience will vary. You might have a very short nigredo, a very long albedo, and a very short rubedo. You may have a very long nigredo and then the briefest of albedos, and then this really tough, difficult rubedo. Like, making this real is so difficult, and oh God, I'm back in the nigredo. Can I really do this? Is this even possible? And then back, oh no, it is possible. Like it's not linear. It's different colors, different shades of experience is the main takeaway here. So I think, given what we know, that alchemy was, intimately related with astrology and magic, I think this is a much healthier view because it's productive. I'm not telling you don't do this, that, or the other. There's none of that. It's like you might think about letting something go during this stage. There might be something you want to let go of. You might, seek sources of new inspiration during this stage, and then you might be trying to work and make those real during this stage. But there's no absolutes of like, don't buy a car, don't buy your computer, don't buy that. No, that's not it at all. It's way more individual and subjective than that. So I think it's a little more realistic, because you can't tell people, don't do this, that, or the other. I mean, you gotta live your life. You can't just cancel, let's just say the visible planets are the 7th, you can't cancel 1/7 of your life for like 3 weeks, or like I said, for even longer if you use these so-called shadow periods. That's ridiculous. So, of course, I think my view is a little healthier, a little more productive. But there's other ones as well. And if we begin to look at the retrograde journey in terms of the what's the band of the ecliptic. You know, the ecliptic is not a, it's not a flat plane. It's not an absolute flat plane like a piece of paper. You know, the planets are rarely actually on the ecliptic, hardly ever. So they, you know, a lot of people say, oh, well, you can't project stars onto the ecliptic, rah, rah. Well, we project planets onto the ecliptic almost all the time. So why wouldn't we project stars onto the ecliptic, you know? And in fact, if we're not projecting planets onto the ecliptic, then the ecliptic is about 18 degrees wide, actually. If you do want to say we're not projecting planets, then you got to have an 18-degree ecliptic. That's a pretty thick old chunk of sky, you know. 10 degrees with your arm extended is 10 degrees is your fist. So that's 2 fists worth of sky, you see? That's a fairly healthy chunk of sky. Planets are constantly moving up and down within that, you know, within that band. And when I began to understand this is when I really began to understand retrograde motion, I think, because when you understand planets as these wanderers, not just around the ecliptic, but above and below the ecliptic, you really begin to see how this idea of a wandering star is true in more than one dimension. Planets actually make their most significant variations. In other words, there is the most volatility, there is the most measurable change in the planet's motion just before, during, and after the retrograde. And they make that not just in terms of back and forth, but in terms of north and south too. Both dimensions have their most volatile changes in motion before, during, and after the retrograde. And when we track this motion, we see a looping shape. It's not this little squished X. There's these different, and there's 8 different shapes that these can take. These 8 different shapes I got from a guy named Hinza in his book Tantra Veda. He was talking about these in terms of Mars, but I figured out that you can apply these to all the planets, and you can apply them by using the planet's nodes, so that these S shapes, and they're not these squished S's, they're actually elongated S's or Z's, really. Often they're like Z shapes. These shapes happen at the nodes, and then you have northern loops when a planet is between its north node and south node, and you have southern shaped loops when the planet is between the south node and north node. You see, and so there's all these different kinds of shapes that the planet can make based on where the retrograde is happening vis-a-vis its nodes. And because Mercury's north node is in Scorpio and its south node is in Taurus, what's halfway between those 2 fixed signs? The sign of Aquarius. So Mercury makes its highest northern loop in Aquarius. We call this the north bending. Mercury achieves its farthest distance from the ecliptic plane north during its retrograde in Aquarius. So this is quite different than, for instance, the retrograde in Leo, where it would achieve its farthest distance south. And it's very different from the retrograde in Scorpio, where it can actually cross the face of the sun in what astronomers call the transit of Mercury. Mercury is literally crosses the ecliptic as the sun is, as it's passing between the sun and the earth. So we have this this eclipse of Mercury, essentially. And so you begin to see how there's these different things going on here with Mercury's retrogrades. And if we look at this particular loop, what we see is that Mercury started out below the ecliptic plane, you know, and it was kind of chugging along through November and December, and then it begins to rise. You know, just after, let's say, you know, just before the new year, Mercury begins to get more north, and then Mercury crosses the ecliptic plane, heading northward on January 11th, and then it continues to go up. And in fact, during the entire retrograde, Mercury is getting higher and higher, and then it's only almost until direct station before Mercury begins to get lower, And then after Mercury stations direct, it actually goes south again. Well, typically when we say things are going south, we think of that in a negative connotation. Whereas usually it's the retrograde that gets the negative connotation, but things are moving up during the retrograde. So is this one of those retrogrades where departure from normal could actually be a really good thing? Well, it was last year in the crypto space. You know, Mercury doing this particular retrograde loop in Aquarius is when crypto went freaking nuts and made this huge, it went north, it went up as Mercury was going up. And in fact, that's what Mercury's doing in the chart of Bitcoin. So wow, you know, imagine that, you see. So it'll be interesting to see if that happens again this time around. But in any event, there's this upward motion that's associated with this retrograde that differentiates it from other retrogrades. And so one of the important dates to note about that is that date that it crosses the ecliptic. And this, I was astounded when I found this. I was reading through. I rarely read books front to back, actually. I hardly ever read books front to back. But I decided to read the Picatrix from front to back because there was this passage that I swear I had seen and I couldn't find it. And I was like, I'm just going to have to read it front to back until I find it. And as I was doing that, I found this spot where they talk about planetary nodes in the Picatrix in this 9th century text. I was like, wow, I was blown away. They call them Jawzahir in Arabic, evidently Guzahar is the Latinized version. But it's said to be, it says, thus the ancient Greek sages were accustomed to observe a planet, watching till it was in its proper Guzahar. They placed it in the degree of the mid-heaven, burned an incense appropriate to the planet, and made sacrifices with prayers, likewise corresponding to the planet, and asked that whatever they willed, they would obtain. So, you know, there's this very magical thing happening and, you know, it's because, to me, it's because, you know, when a planet is on the ecliptic plane, it's directly interacting with the Earth plane. It's like it's injecting its energy into it's like the difference between taking a pill and like taking an injection. You know, you're going to get the effects a lot quicker and a lot more dramatic effects from an injection than you will from taking a pill. So yeah, this Guzahar on January 11th is definitely something that I've been watching, and these Guzahars are often very dramatic turning points in the crypto space as well that I've noticed. And they're even with the Dow Jones, you know, back at UAC 2018, in my lecture about these planetary nodes, I said, you know, Jupiter crossing its south node in 2008 was coincident with a stock market crash. I wonder if when it does that again in 2020, if we'll see the same thing. Well, it was actually the same week that Jupiter's crossing of the ecliptic was exact that the stock market crashed. So that was a pretty accurate forecast, I would say. I don't think very many people forecast that within a week of exact. So, you know, this stuff works. And ultimately, that's the proof's in the pudding, right? So you can see here, if you go to ephemeris.com and you just type in the data, you can see there's Mercury, 0 degrees latitude, 07 minutes. By the time it's noontime, Mercury's already 7 minutes past the ecliptic. It's not exact, but, you know, since we're told to use the ascendant or the midheaven and not the IC or descendant, which I'm not entirely sure, especially because Mercury has triplicity dignity at this point in a night chart. Maybe those angles are even better. I don't know, but I'm gonna just stick with the recipe for now and do a noon chart. And then by that time, Mercury's about 7 minutes. That's still pretty darn close. You can see there's nothing else that's even 0. Mars is at 0:15, so Mercury's about half as far from the ecliptic as Mars is, and everything else is much closer. Uranus is like 0:24, so it's about 3 times as far as Mercury is from the ecliptic. And Uranus is getting closer, Uranus crossing the ecliptic has been a story that you can track. It's pretty simple. 1776 plus 84, 1860, 1860 plus 84, 1944, 1944 plus 84, 2028. That's all I'm going to say about that for now. But it's you look at the history, and that stuff is coming not too far down the pipe. So in this sense, direct motion, since planets are direct most of the time and they have relatively small latitude north and south shifts, moving relatively steady either on the ecliptic or parallel to the ecliptic, this essentially refers to like being on the straight and narrow, just kind of same old, head down, doing your same, doing your routine, more or less operating according to normal, whether that's the socio-cultural normal or the personal normal or both, whichever. These loops represent dramatic shifts from normal. And so they represent getting off the beaten path and a challenge or deviation from normal. Again, if you're going on a cruise and, right now my wife's boss he just sold part of his company for $60-some million. He's on a cruise for like all of January. That's a pretty sweet departure from normal. But yeah, that's what these loops represent. So hey, he's I would like to say that I told him to do that, and I don't think he would be down with astrology at all. I don't think I'm not sure he even knows that I'm an astrologer, and that doesn't need to, but essentially in this one, I think Campbell's distinction of two modes of mythology is really applicable. Campbell said, look, there's basically two kinds of mythology. One we would call the way of the village. There's all these myths about, hey, if you don't go along with the program, bad shit can happen, and so it's a way of reinforcing the heritage and the orthodoxy of the society. And those are important myths, because there has to be some amount of cohesion among, or there won't be a society, right? I mean, that's pretty simple to understand. That's why I don't, and then Marxism, like this idea that, we're going to destroy the socio-cultural order, and out of that, something good's going to happen. Yeah, okay, maybe not. It's kind of a crapshoot, don't you think? That's, but anyways, there's, the way of the forest adventure is not necessarily trying to destroy the socio-cultural order so much as it is just, hey, you guys are in the village doing that thing. I'm going out into the forest for a little while. I'll see you, in a bit. And by going off the beaten path, Campbell famously said, if there's a path before you, it's not your path. You got to be off the path to find your path, because that's the way it works. And so being off the beaten path, breaking free from the social dogmas of authority and tradition, is the initiation into the mysteries and magic of the special world. So this is the way of the hero's adventure. The hero or heroine, goes off into the special world. They find this elixir or this boon, and they bring it back. So remember, visita interiora, visit the interior spaces, but it's a visit. It's not, you're not supposed to go there and stay there. You got to return, and you got to return. And Jung famously said, what, like, this is not a hippie trip of just being different. It's not about just being different. It's about finding something different and then bringing it back and making things better, making a new normal from the difference that you found. That's making a better, more healthy normal is the ultimate goal of the hero's adventure. So taking the road less traveled might look different depending on the shape of the loop, right? For a northern loop, there might be more of this Yang style hero's adventure of like fighting a dragon or going on a quest for the grail or what have you. With the southern loops, it might be more about finding some kind of healing or magical situation, which would be more yin, And then with the Z loops, there might be the need this is where, you know, the hero or heroine is bringing them, you know, the new back from, and trying to integrate it into into the normal world. So there might be, you know, you might need, and that might take a few tries, right? You might, you know, Einstein created how many light bulbs that didn't work before he got the one that worked. You know, he was trying to bring this thing from the special world of of imagination and make it real. And it took a lot of tries before he got it right, you see. And so that's what these Z loops might be about, is like finding that way to bring the magic of the special world back into the normal world. And so I'm going to leave you with this meme that says, it's, again, way back with Morpheus, you know, looking at Neo, Neo's reflected in the black sunglasses and saying, what if I told you there is no blue pill? Because ultimately, in terms of the heroine's adventure, you know, the first step on the adventure is refusal of the call, actually, you know, and honestly, you know, like what sane person wouldn't, you know, they're going along, they got a good thing going, you know, they're in business, they're doing things according to the way of the village, everything's going well. You're not just going to say, hey, by the way, you know, watch the shop for a month, I'm heading off into the forest. Like not very many people are going to just, at the first glance, you know, just, yeah, sure, let's go, right? No, they're gonna say, no, that's cool, man, you go ahead. You go on ahead and let me know what it was like, you know. So refusal of the call, but refusal of the call is the first step on the adventure, you see. And then the call comes back around and it's like, no, we really think you need to come. Like there's this thing out there that's yours and yours alone, and only you can find it. And so really the blue pill represents like the initial refusal of the call, but it's only a temporary fix. Like once you've seen that there's something else out there, you can't unsee it. You can't unknow that there's another world awaiting you, you know. And so and that's what Jung said, that, you know, that's why people have breakdowns, is because, you know, we go called or uncalled, you know, called or uncalled, we will visit the special world. And so it's better, you know, yeah, it's understandable you know, talk to the hand the first time around, okay, you know, yeah, sure. But if you keep making the magic world talk to the hand, it will intrude on your reality and yank you out of your normal, you see. So it's much better to go willingly than to be, you know, to have your world crashing down upon you because you were trying to repress this this journey into the special world. So there really is no blue pill as far as I can tell. Ultimately, growth happens, whether it happens through a so-called disaster, or whether it happens by, you know, just jumping off the cliff into the unknown. So yeah, that hopefully we can continue to see some more nuanced discourse around retrogrades. I think that, you know, as I've said, there's at least 4 different ways, and hopefully I didn't diss too hard the first 2, because I think, you know, there's definitely something, you know, to be had with understanding, you know, those points of view, but they're limited. They're not the final say. And in these other ones that I've presented you with are not the final say. I would really love if somebody would start working with these loops and come up with a different thing than I did. That would be fantastic. That would be true progress. And the same way with the other stuff, you know. I think that's how art and sciences and really life progresses. People begin to experiment and play around with things, and they, you know, they take something that somebody else did and they change it up a little bit, and it, you know, and that's and it mutates, and that's how life goes on. So hopefully I didn't, you know, diss other views too hard, or take on the pretense that mine was better or some kind of ultimate truth, because If I did, let me tell you, I apologize for that, and I take it back very strongly, because that's not the case. But it is the case that if we are seeing only one of those views as the truth, that we're fooling ourselves, you see. So hopefully that so hopefully you got some, like, maybe the albedo's happening already. Like there was a couple insights there. It's like, oh, I see how that's happening in my life, right? And you know, when it comes time for the conjunction, you know, way before I discovered these loops or these elongations that in this material, I had people working with these conjunctions, because, you know, this Cazimi, this in the heart of the throne, in the throne room of the king or queen, you know, I thought, even before I discovered these other views, I thought, well, that's got to be a good thing, you know, like, and like, maybe we can work with that. So I had people working, you know, with these Kazimis for a long time. And like, you know, if you know what you want, you can initiate things at that time. I did my first podcast on the day of an inferior conjunction. And hey, 13 years later, I'm still going strong. And like, I've built an entire, you know, second half of my career so far on that, you know, off of that. And it's been great. So, but, you know, if you're still not clear about it, you can do divination. You can cry out, you know, in the Hermetic paradigm, you know, there's, in the beginning, there's light, and the darkness actually comes out of the light, and the darkness calls out to the light, and the light injects itself into the darkness, and out of that, this third thing's born. So you can call out like, hey, I'm lost here. Like, you know, hello, is it, you know, where's the light? Where's some direction, you know, whatever powers that be, Mercury, you know, the sun, you know, whatever you consider sacred, you can call out at this time and say, hey, you know, which way is up? Because I'm only supposed to visit this underworld, I'm pretty sure, and I got no idea which way is up. So like, if you could just point me in the general direction, that would be great, kind of thing, you know. And I believe firmly that if you do that with true reverence and humility, that you'll get an answer. If you're paying attention, you'll get an answer. And then, you know, and then the albedo will come, and you know, this too will pass, the darkness will pass, and we'll get to go back to a different normal. There's no normal that we're going to be returning to. And I think that's very clear by now. But, you know, one of the things about this retrograde is that it is activating the degrees of the first degrees of Aquarius, which is where the great conjunction happens. So, you know, that whole process of like creating a new world that the great conjunction is supposed to represent, it kind of got put on hold by the pandemic, right? Because everything got shut down, and then we've been living in this kind of liminal reality. It might be that this reactivation of the great conjunction is what it takes to get us back out there, creating this new world that this age of Jupiter Saturn conjunctions and air signs is supposed to represent. You know, it might be only now that Mercury comes back and reactivates that conjunction degree that things can begin to actually happen, you see. So I think that these next you know, months between the Aquarius retrograde and the Gemini retrograde could be very interesting in terms of developments that we will begin to see. Yes, there is a new world taking shape. There is a new light in the horizon, and I know which way I'm going now, and now I've got direction, and I can, you know, off we go, kind of thing. So yeah, I'm pretty convinced that will be and I already feel it, and I've already pretty much laid out my course for myself, and I'm ready to start hitting it. And so it'll be, you know, I have speaking of courses, I have a course that I'm creating for my members. That's going to be a 6-week course that's going to basically it's going to be fundamentals. It's going to be Hermetic Astrology 101. It's going to be the fundamentals of Hermetic astrology. I'm gonna finally go ahead and codify that and lay it out for people, mainly so that they have an understanding of all the principles that I'm using when I'm creating these monthly magic reports, so that they have a better grip on what I'm doing, so that they can get more use out of these reports. I mean, I create a 20 and 40 page report every month for people. And I think that, you know, sometimes it's like, wow, it's almost a little bit too much for them. They're like, what exactly do I do with this? So I've created this course. So it's not too late. If you want to get on board, you want to become a member, check out my page. There's a member page, but you can join from the front page too. You can pretty much do everything you need to do from the front page these days. I went ahead and rearranged the front page, so it's got pretty much everything you need there. The front page, home page, whatever you want to call it. And you can, yeah, if you want to consider joining us. One thing that, if you're not quite ready for that, make sure you join up for the newsletter. And that again is right there on the home page. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to offer some trial subscriptions for free to my newsletter people at some point. It might be January, it might be February, but if you go ahead and sign up for the newsletter, you'll get one of these 20 to 40 page reports for free, which, you know, all these people are paying between 15 and 25, depending on the level and the other benefits that they're going in for. So it's like a, you know, it's a $15, $20 giveaway, essentially. Hey, I'm following my own advice. It's getting towards the elongation, and I'm doing a giveaway. Yeah. So I'm practicing what I preach in here. But yeah, go ahead and sign up for the newsletter, and you'll get one of those reports, and you can maybe, you know, that'll give you a better idea if it's something that you want to sign up for. All right, so a little bit later in the month, we're going to be talking about Inanna's journey to see Inky after the Venus interior conjunction. When Venus starts to get closer to her rise back into visibility, we're going to talk about the next series in the Inanna mythology, as she goes to see her grandfather or uncle, depending on how you read it, the god of wisdom, Inky. So be on the lookout for that one. And until next time, bright blessings of Mercury as evening star before he enters the underworld. And happy Negretto, everybody. And may you receive the light of the albedo. May your faith be restored in that process. Bye for now.